What if I told you that in 1624-ish, a group of men broke away from the Plymouth colony to found an egalitarian, sexually liberal settlement in what is now Quincy, Massachusetts? Let's talk about Merrymount and its Lord of Misrule, Thomas Morton. Welcome back to Yesterqueers. My name's Amanda, and I'm a public historian of queer history. Thomas Morton led a colorful life, even before he got involved in the colonies. Born in Devon, England around 1579, he was a lawyer, and according to William Heath, very much a dandy and a playboy. But he was also adventurous, going to visit the Plymouth colony for 3 months in 1621. He loved the New World, calling it a masterpiece of nature, but he was appalled at how awful and intolerant the Pilgrims were. While they saw everything outside the boundaries of their colony as wild and dangerous, Morton embraced the natural world, and he thought that colonists should be forming friendly relationships with the local tribes. He repeatedly accused the Plymouth colony of letting their irrational fear of native people drive them to genocidal behavior. And he was right. Morton was absolutely still a colonizer. His ultimate goal was to bring the Algonquin people into the fold of his more liberal brand of Christianity. But he thought the best way to do that was by building community and exchanging knowledge, not by violence. Thomas Morton returned to Plymouth in 1624 as the senior partner in a trading venture backed by the Crown. He arrived on the Unity with his business partner, Captain/Pirate Richard Wollaston, and 30 indentured servants. Since Morton wasn't really a fan of the Pilgrims, they set their trading post up about 30 miles north of the Plymouth plantation on the very edge of the colony's boundary. Unfortunately, Morton quickly discovered that Wollaston wasn't just trading goods. He was also selling their servants' indentures to Virginia tobacco plantations. It wasn't against the law, and Morton had no legal recourse, so instead, he convinced the remaining servants, as well as a group of native allies, to overthrow Wollaston and start their own settlement. Once Wollaston was gone, Morton freed all of the indentured servants and declared himself not the mayor, but instead just the host of the new settlement, which they called Merrymount. The name was likely inspired by the Latin word for sea, but it could also be a pun of another Latin phrase that means erect phallus, or a joke at the expense of Catholics, or possibly all three. Even Thomas Morton left room for interpretation in his writings about the settlement. It was the Puritans who started calling it Merrymount, and it was meant to be an insult, because making merry was sinful and deviant behavior. Merrymount, which was inhabited almost entirely by men, was envisioned as a sort of utopia where colonists and native people could live together in equality and liberation, and where the ancient revels could be celebrated once more. It was queer Woodstock meets Plato's Republic, basically. Morton even installed an 80-foot-high maypole topped with deer antlers and declared May Day to be an official holiday in the settlement. They even composed a May Day song that honored male lovers in Greek mythology. Unfortunately, the idyllic settlement didn't last. The Puritans saw Thomas Morton, and by extension the entire Merrymount settlement, as an existential threat to their way of life. So on the May Day celebrations in 1628, Miles Standish, whom Morton called Captain Shrimp because he was so short, led a group of men from the Plymouth colony to arrest Thomas Morton and chop down the maypole. According to Peter Mancall, Plymouth Governor William Bradford declared that Morton had become a Lord of Misrule, whose defiance necessitated his exile from the fledgling colony. So Morton was dropped off on the uninhabited Isles of Shoals and left to fend for himself. Fortunately, he was rescued by a passing ship and made his way back to Merrymount in 1629, by which point it had come under the jurisdiction of the newly formed Massachusetts Bay Colony. Morton strongly objected not only to the Puritan way of life, but also to the new colony's government, which he thought undermined the authority of the king. That really pissed off Governor John Winthrop, so they arrested Thomas Morton again, shipped him back to England, and burned the Merrymount settlement to the ground. But if the Puritans thought that returning Morton to England was going to get him out of their hair, they were sorely mistaken. Because Morton sued the Massachusetts Bay Company, and with the help of some English investors, including Sir Ferdinando Gorges, he managed to get the Massachusetts Bay Colony's charter revoked in 1635. At the time, Morton's win was seen by many as a triumph for freedom and self-determination. Morton also wrote a book called New English Canaan that extolled the virtues of the New World while absolutely excoriating the Pilgrims of Plymouth and the Puritans of Massachusetts Bay. He couldn't even get the book published in London. He had to go to Amsterdam, and it was banned in the colonies. Still, Morton loved the New World, even if he hated the religious zealots who were trying to control it, so he returned to Massachusetts in 1643. But Puritan leaders were so enraged by his book and by the revocation of their charter that they imprisoned him. Again. This time they held him for a year before finally banishing him to an Anglican colony called Agamenticus. We now know that place as York, Maine. Thomas Morton remained there for the rest of his life and died in 1646 at the age of about 71. That's it for today. As always, more information, including sources and further reading, is available in the usual place.